Well, welcome to this next episode of No Neutral Moments. I always say I'm excited about our guests, but rarely do I get to have like a real cowboy who's a friend on the show. So I have my friend John Scharbauer here. We're just gonna go into a conversation, probably cover a lot of things, but I want to start off, John, with just when you say the name Scharbauer around here, it's a legendary cattle family. Some people may think different. Give us a little bit of history of just your family and how you got into the cattle business here in West Texas.
Yeah, you bet, Patrick, and thank you for having me on here. I follow your show. I enjoy it.
Thanks.
I always like your guest and
Good plug.
your topics. Yeah. But I mean, cowboy's a pretty loose term, because at this point, I don't know, I guess we kind of give identities, and I don't know if that's, but anyways, I'll go with it.
How would you define a cowboy? How would you define a cowboy?
Well, I mean, and I think a cowboy is, obviously a dying breed. Yeah. I think kind of the last stance here, what we got left here in America. I mean, somebody's still going out living free, kind of riding the country, and kind of beats to their own drum. I'm kind of my family granddad, we come from a long line of cowmen is kind of the thing, because I'm not on the ranch today. And that's something that, somewhere I wish I was. I kind of, but I realized real quick I'm not supposed to be out there every day. So, the history, I mean, you mentioned it, and our family gets labeled a lot as an oil family. And, I like to go back to the roots and kind of where it started. And from migration west from Germany over to the New York, upstate New York area. And then my great-great uncle, John Scharbauer, kind of started the voyage down here in the early 1880s. Got down to Fort Worth.
Now, at the time, was he in cattle?
Came from, had some agriculture back in Germany.
Yeah.
That all the historical stuff we've studied. We had farms and stuff back there.
Yeah.
Pig farms, mainly.
Back in Germany.
Whereabouts
in Germany?
Munich.
Okay.
Yeah. Which, that's something that's pretty cool that I've been able to, because I love history. And like our family, it's been documented quite a bit just from the historical standpoint of, coming to Midland, and then kind of what we've done here in Midland as far as just setting up shop. And but it's neat to be able to trace your family back 5 or 6 generations.
Yeah.
Not a lot of people can do that.
No.
But it's been done in our family, and just because we take pride in our history, and like I'm a 5th generation Scharbauer here in Midland, 5th generation ranching here. Yeah. And so I like to go back and be able to see that. I mean, you can see it at the Museum of the Southwest. You can hear everything I'm going to probably tell you. There's a whole wing over there, which
I didn't even know that.
Yeah, the museum, we can get into that a little later, but that house belonged to my grandmother, her family, the Turners. And after my granddad's passing, they made a point to kind of extend a wing there and create a Turner Scharbauer, kind of a part of the museum where it's historical events up till present, try to keep it modern, but there's horse trophies over there too. So you want to see Kentucky Derby trophies? There's 2 of them in there.
Yeah.
And so
what are those
that's
2
history.
horses?
Well, that Alashiba was owned by my grandparents, my grandmother, and my late aunt Pam, and Toby Lee was owned by Mr. Turner, my great granddad on the Turner side. He won in the 50s.
So go back. We're in New York. How do you get to Texas?
Yeah. So, and from what I understand, that family, my great uncle's family, had had a leather shop up there. Okay. So they were making bags and boots and purses and stuff like that. So started kind of up there, wanted to get into agriculture, and had heard about this land and the movement west and south. Where there wasn't much out here settled.
And this is late 1880s.
Early 1880s.
Okay.
Yeah, 1883 is when we got off the train in Fort Worth.
Wow.
Yeah, followed the railroad tracks were getting built west.
Yeah.
So my great great uncle followed them as far west as he could get before they were not being made yet.
So literally to the end of the tracks.
Yeah, Eastland, Texas, which is just outside Abilene.
Yeah.
And he kind of set up shop there because he was waiting on the railroad to finish. And was waiting tables. He got a side job at a hotel there, and he was waiting tables and trying to get in the business somewhere. And he had heard some sheep farmers talking about their industry, and they were talking about how bad it was. And he just kind of popped off, said, "Hey, I'm looking to get in. Can you guys help me get in? I'll be happy to buy your flock." And so they made a deal. And, the rumor is he came down here with a couple $1,000s, which I don't know what that's worth today, but that's what he had.
Yeah.
And spent $400 or $500 on this flock of sheep. Worked his way, put little land together, kept moving west, and there's obviously some things that probably went on in between there, but got to Marinfield, which is now Stanton.
Oh, okay.
And that's kind of where it settled, 1884, right in there, 85. And right in there, he'd grown that flock pretty big. And the ranchers out here told him, but we were Scharbauer.
That's what I was going to ask you a minute ago.
And
Scharbauer.
Yeah, and our name, it's not, and it's spelled Scharbauer.
Yeah.
And outside of Midland, if I make a dinner reservation, I say Scharbauer, and they never misspell it.
Really?
But in Midland, it's misspelled all the time because we say Scarborough. It's the Texas way of saying it.
Scarborough.
Well, that came from the ranchers back then telling us, our family, hey, you're going to be Texan. It's Scarborough. So that's kind of how that deal went. But, traded. It got here. They said, hey, you can't run those sheep. You could, but there's wolves, there's coyotes, different predators up here that are just picking them apart. And he realized the country got stouter the further west he got.
That's a good way to put it.
Well, when I mean stouter, a lot of people don't realize there's grass out here. And it at one time it was really good. We're in a 3-year drought right now, which, it's sad to look at and it's hard to ranch. But back then, this short grass, these mid grasses, they put a lot of weight on cattle and do really good. So traded his sheep in. Basically, at that time, I want to say it's the late 1880s, made one of the largest livestock transactions in the history of the United States.
Wow.
Where he loaded up nearly 30-some-odd thousand head of sheep and sent them to Chicago.
Send them to Chicago. Okay.
Yeah. Because that's where they traded. It was one of those things. It's just like it is now, everything, commodities and whatever. Well, traded them and brought in some of the first Hereford cows. And Hereford is that red cow with a white face and it's got the horns. And so brought those to Texas. And that herd, that breed kind of ran West Texas, the Panhandle, into New Mexico. Yeah. And he was kind of responsible for bringing that herd into Texas. And then he gets down here and he calls his brother Christian. And that's kind of where my bloodline fits in, because he comes down and they form Scarborough Brothers, the late 1880s.
Scarborough Brothers Cattle.
And they start operating. They build a bank, First National Bank of Midland, late 1880s.
So he's moved from what is now Stanton to Midland at this time.
Yeah, pretty much. But, back then, I guess it wasn't. And Midland became a city in, 1885?
Yeah.
Something like that?
Yeah.
So all this is happening at the very start of Midland.
Yep.
Well, Midland, and he didn't have any, he just set up shop and basically built a bank, started putting some land together. And that's kind of how it all started. And when, you kind of fast forward, they called their nephew, which would be my great-granddad, Clarence Scharbauer. He just went by Clarence Scharbauer. Now he's known as Senior.
Yeah.
But he moved to Midland. They sent him down here, and he was just a young kid. I can't remember his age, 9 or 10 years old when he got here.
Was he in New York?
He was.
Okay.
So he comes down, and he gets a job as a paper route. He runs paper route. I don't know how many residents were here, but he was responsible for delivering the papers.
What paper was it? Do you know?
I don't know.
It wasn't the MRT.
No, I doubt it. Yeah. I don't think they've been around that long.
Yeah.
I don't know if outside of our, Scarborough cattle, I think probably I'd be the longest business here in Midland, I would assume.
Yeah.
Because we're still going.
Yeah.
But ran a paper route and kind of worked his way up through the business. Obviously, go to the ranches and help when they needed help. And the land was getting put together this whole time. And
so he's acquiring sections.
Yeah, he is. And big country, bought into one of the very first university lands leases.
Okay.
Is a little over 400 sections out in Andrews County. And that kind of started a lot of that. We have a ranch out there, Five Wells Horse Camp, which sold that lease. But yeah, at one time, when it all came together, and my great-granddad, about the time he took over, which was 1917, right in there, between 14 and 17, and that's when they formed Scarborough Cattle Company, because they brought in Clarence. And when he took over, and then he started putting more together, he married Ruth Cowden.
Yeah.
So you got Ruth Cowden Scarborough, and you got my great-granddad, Clarence Scarborough, and they would actually go out and squat way back then, because Texas was trying to get rid of land. There was all these big lands, so you could go sit on land. I can't remember it was like 4 weeks, or it might have been 4 months. They'd get in dugouts, and if you sat on it long enough, you got the section.
So you'd basically just camp out. Which is what the squatting was.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
And before you knew it, I mean, I'm not going to say they squatted for all that, but they put together nearly 500,000 acres of land.
Wow.
So, and then my great-granddad, Clarence, is probably, the more entrepreneur, which I love reading his history. He's kind of one of those men that, outside of Jesus, I'd love to meet, like he's just, I've never heard a bad story about him. And he just, if Midland needed it, he would try to build it. And, there's a saying in our family, if it's good for Midland, it's good for the Scarbors. And I think that started at the very start.
Yeah.
Because Clarence sees opportunity and says, well, what do we need here? And so he's responsible.
And you're talking about senior, who we would refer to as senior.
Yeah, senior, because my granddad, Clarence Jr., who's probably more well-known in Midland modern times, just for kind of the stuff he's done with the hospital and with the foundation and different things. But great-granddad, he put together, he ended up building Scarborough Hotel, started a radio station with KCRS. Which, they needed to be able to talk and get radio out here. And it's kind of cool. The CRS and KCRS stands for Clarence Ruth Scarborough. And it's 550 on the dial, 5 being our brand. So
Didn't
on the AM.
that.
Yeah, so,
Where's the brand 5 come from again?
Well, the brand 5 comes back from that purchase in Andrews County.
Okay.
The Wells family, they branded with a 5 on the right hip and then a W L or something they had on the side of an animal. And it had 3 girls, and then I think it was because they had 3 girls and then the husband and wife, so they had 5 Wells families, so they branded with a 5W.
5W.
And once we took that, we ran that for a little bit and then dropped the W.
Okay.
And so that's how we ended up with the 5, and we've had it ever since.
Still the brand?
Still the brand. Yeah, everything we do is figure 5. It's a simple number, but it's kind of one of those, that's what we put on stuff. Yeah. But anyways, the cat, he's going along. And stop me if you want.
No, I might here in a minute.
Yeah, because he's chugging along, and he's just got his head down working. And this thing called the oil boom, the oil deal ticked off.
Yeah.
The early 20s.
Yeah.
It's kind of the first, when the oil became kind of big out here. And at the time, Midland was still kind of known as being halfway between Fort Worth and El Paso.
That's the name.
So a lot of people called it Midway. And it was just at that time, boxcar and a couple things. Well, he saw this as opportunity again. And he wasn't an oil man. He was a cow man. You got to remember that. Like, he wasn't thinking, like, I've got all this land. I'm just a cow man.
Yeah.
And at that time, he was running one of the largest registered Hereford herds in the world. He had about 30,000 head that he was running. So he gets along, sells a ranch in Fort Stockton. And this is where the history gets kind of, where a lot of people don't know, is my granddad had a brother. And I'm actually named after him. I'm John Christian. And this was my great-granddad's and Ruth Cowden's son. And he was 13 years old when he passed in 1923.
From what?
Well, him and a buddy were riding horses out at that Five Wells Ranch, and they were just playing, running. They left a windmill, the number 5 mill, and his horse stumbled and fell with him. And back then it was a Model A, model whatever, to get him back to the hospital. and he never did regain consciousness, and he passed, and that really put a toll on my great granddad, and obviously, but then they had no kids at that point.
Yeah.
And so this is when I think the history of Midland, I mean, I don't know, obviously I wouldn't be here. So, they decided they wanted to have another child. And at this point, they were up in age. And they did. They had another son, and that was my granddad, Clarence Scharbauer. Junior. Yeah. And he was born in a little house right over here, just outside downtown. The hotel was getting built because at that time, my great-granddad had decided to sell that Fort Stockton ranch so he could build the Scharbauer Hotel. And, he wasn't worried. I mean, obviously, we're talking the Great Depression's about to hit. He finishes the hotel in 28, 29, and the Depression hits. So amongst all this talk of the economy being terrible, everything being bad around him, he just kept building and built the hotel. And they lived in the hotel. They lived on the top floor there. And, it was just kind of a deal. It became a place in Midland to do business. And that was his goal. I think it's 250 rooms.
Wow.
I've got some of the old menus. It's like $2.50 a night. It's pretty cool to read some of that stuff. You go down and get a haircut.
Yeah.
It had a barbershop down, and they had all sorts of stuff. He was famous for bringing stock show. He'd always bring the champion into the lobby and set him in there. And
as in the champion
steer or whatever at a show.
We're talking about a human.
No,
like
animal. Yeah, so there's always kind of a deal, and a place to be. But and
the oil boom ratchets up.
The oil boom ratchets up, and we're still running cattle. He's got the bank.
Yeah,
he's got the hotel, radio station. And at this time too, airports and that hadn't come along yet, but He's instrumental in getting the airport done. There's a picture of him reaching over a fence, shaking hands with a 3-star general, and they make a deal on that airport.
And this would be the one that's now where...
This is Midland International.
It is where... Okay.
Yeah,
I didn't know if
same
that had
place.
to do with the airfield that is now where the Legacy Freshman School is.
No, it's out at International because that was actually on the Crowley Ranch. When you take off from that, you'll see a little ranch house off to the east.
Yeah.
And that house is the ranch house for the Crowley.
Okay.
And that ranch stretched all the way to the Loop.
The Crowley that everybody around here calls Crowley.
Crowley. Yeah. When people moved into Grassland, they're like, I live on Crowley. And I'm like, it's Crowley.
That was my first street I lived on.
It's Crowley.
I know.
But maybe it is Crowley, but we call it Crowley, and it's kind of like one of those things. But he dies in 1942, my great-granddad. And why that's instrumental, why we say we're cattle people is he signed his first oil lease in 1941. Never really cashed an oil check.
Really?
So it was all built, our family and all the business was built on cattle and banking. And so never gets oil money because he's just starting in the deal. And my granddad at the time was in college. He was in his first semester at A&M, and he was 17 years old. And he gets the call that, hey, your dad passed. And so he comes home to Midland. So he went to college one semester, but he had to come home, run the business. So at 17 years old, he was asked to take over the bank, the hotel, the radio station, and all the ranches.
Wow.
At that time, we're still a little over 500,000 acres and a lot of cows. And obviously his mom had a lot of knowledge, Miss Cowden, or Miss Scharbauer, I guess. And the Cowden's been around a long time in this city. So big ranching family too. I mean, they're cattle people. And so he takes over. And, my granddad was instrumental on basically at that point using land to develop and grow Midland. And I don't know if it'd ever be, I don't know if there's ever going to be anybody that it gave as much as him as far as land. And it's pretty remarkable going back from the first generation to the stewards of the land, but also seeing around themselves and what they could do for the city.
For the whole city. Yeah.
And it goes back to what was good for Midland was good for the Scharbauers.
Exactly.
And
how do you decide I want to go into the cattle business? When did you catch the bug? When did you decide I think that's what I want to do.
Well, I mean, I always grew up with it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, my dad, and that, you know, to kind of fast forward to him, because my granddad kept all the ranches together. And then my dad, in the early 80s, took over the company.
Mm-hmm.
And he started running the ranches. At that time, it was 11 ranches. My granddad had gone up and bought a ranch in 1952 in the Panhandle,
Mm-hmm.
which we still have.
Right.
And, you know, I grew up there. My dad moved me, and I have 3 sisters, moved us to Amarillo. And so I went to started school in Amarillo
Mm-hmm.
and just kind of started a new life up there, really.
Yeah.
I got away from Midland, which... you know, I love Amarillo. Good place. Got a lot of good friends up there. But Dad had bought a personal ranch northeast Amarillo, which happened to burn. The big south end of it burned during these last Panhandle fires.
Yeah.
As a bad deal. A lot of people hurting up there.
A lot of hurting people.
Oh, yeah. It's a bad deal. But grew up there. And, you know, I always would go to the ranches and help, you know, when I could and go weekends. But I was also a sport guy.
Yeah.
Like, and so every generation kind of changed. So I played sports in town. On the weekends, I'd go. Summer, there was no summer ball because I had to be at the ranch.
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't an option. Dad said, no, you're at the ranch. You know, we got 3 miles of fence to build up here. And so that was kind of how the summers went. But I didn't really know I was going into it. I went to TCU out of high school,
Mm-hmm.
Did business undergrad, and then I ended up going through TCU Ranch Management.
Okay.
A lot of it is because that's how what I felt like I was supposed to do.
TCU's one of the most prolific ranch management schools in the nation, isn't it?
It is, and in my opinion, it's the best.
Mm-hmm.
With just the network alone, I mean, you know, it takes anywhere from 25 to 30 some odd people a year. And when I say people, because, you know, there might be a 18-year-old kid in there right out of high school. But like in my class, there was a 65-year-old woman that had just, you know, lost her husband and didn't know how to run a ranch, and she wanted to keep it.
Mm-hmm.
And so she went through it. So it's a 9-month course, very intense.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you go 9 to 4. It's like having a job. So it was, you know, you go 9 to 4 Monday through Friday, and there's no being late. There's no, I mean, it's a reality check real quick, especially for a college kid that's used to sleeping in and, you know, having a good time, whatever. But, I go back and at this point, I don't really know. I wasn't smart enough I wasn't ever a good student. So like I didn't really have any interest in going anything else.
Mm-hmm.
Like I loved the cow.
Yeah.
It was fascinating to me that genetics, you can alter a herd and the flavor of beef just by genetics, and you can increase size by doing this without having to do this. So that stuff really was interesting to me.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of, I went back to Amarillo, moved on a ranch up there, and really just kind of struggling to find my identity. I'll be honest. Like I felt like I was in my calling, but I really didn't know my identity, which I'm just now maybe figuring out, which is crazy. I'm 43 now. So
it's a lifetime journey.
It is. And so I felt like I was in the right space, but I wasn't.
Yeah.
I still didn't know what I was doing. And, but I had all these wild ideas, and it's hard to go to an operation that's been running for 100 years and try to change it. Even Dad's like, son, it's been working like this. Let's going.
Just let it keep going.
Yeah, you know, I mean, it's funny because every generation had their own thing into our business. Dad brought in Angus cattle in the 90s and started crossing our Herefords with high-end Angus bulls, and we started developing an F1, the black baldy, the black cow with the white face.
Okay.
So now we have a half Hereford, half Angus animal, which we were seeing huge growths in weight, big things like that. And he kept it going, you know. And then obviously as time went, the ranches, Dad ran it more like a business. My granddad's idea of a crossbred cow was a Hereford cow and a pump jack. He said, we got the best cross in the country. It's a pump jack and a Hereford cow.
Yeah.
And Dad didn't accept that because we're cow people. You know, my granddad was right in the middle. He's still cow man, and he'd claim a horse man because he could walk around one time and tell you everything about it. He was about as good with a horse as, I mean, he had an eye. Granddad.
Was he what they would call the proverbial horse whisperer?
You know, I don't know if he would whisper at him.
But he could identify him.
He could, yeah. And he would never forget it. If he was alive today and I asked him, hey, Granddaddy, tell me about that colt in 73, he'd tell you its dam, his sire,
Wow.
where they came from. He could tell you the brand on them, the way they were marked.
Yeah.
He had a memory like there was nothing like it. I've never seen anything like it.
Do you have this shared love for the horse?
Not as much. I mean, I see the horse as a tool and a companion.
Mm-hmm.
I've had some really good horses, but as I've kind of grown away from that life, you know, I'm not on them like I used to be.
Mm.
You know, there was a time when I might be horseback, you know, 100 days a year.
Yeah.
When I was living on the ranch and going, and now it's limited because I got a lot of irons in the fire.
Yeah.
So I'm only during the works.
What's the feeling, the mystique? I'm just trying to paint a picture in my mind of you wake up in the morning, you have a good breakfast, you get on horseback, you're out in nature, you're running with cattle. I mean, what's the I don't want to. I'm going to use this word. What's the spiritual feeling of that? I imagine it's just most people are never going to experience this. They're going to see it because they identify with Yellowstone,
Right?
But they're not going to know what is this like.
Yeah, and that's something, you know, like I get it. And the Western lifestyle has probably never been as popular as it is today.
Yeah,
and a lot of it has to do with TV shows like that. But there's something different about it. I think when you look to the east and you're sitting there and you're watching the sun crack, and you just see God's glory.
Mm.
And then, you know, I've been in so many places where you look around and it can only be God,
mm-hmm.
and you're there.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of times though, rarely, you know, are you alone. Like we drop off, you know, unless you just go take a joyride out with yourself, which I will tend to just go out and do stuff like that, just because everybody I think needs to ground every once in a while,
mm-hmm.
and you get away from the city, get away from all these frequencies, and your body just needs that,
mm-hmm.
and you can feel it out there. And to be one with the land and the country, it is different because, I mean, there's times you look around, there's nobody within miles
mm-hmm.
of you, and
just you and your animal.
Yeah, I mean, you're on a 1,300 pound, 1,400 pound animal,
mm-hmm.
and you're out there trying to be the best steward you can.
Yeah,
because that's just it. Like, there's really nothing like. It's hard to explain. I've seen so many things out there that can't be explained,
mm-hmm.
and there's because you need these things to cooperate.
Yeah,
and you got to have trust that they are going to. And I mean, I can tell story after story about just little things happening, but the things you see out there are just in the feeling like it's a calming. Yeah, I wish everybody could experience that. Mm-hmm. The problem is everybody's moving into cities.
Yeah,
and but you know it is. There's nothing like it, and the people that are involved too.
Great people.
It's the core of the industry, is the faith that these people have.
Yeah,
and the willingness to just get up and go.
Yeah,
no matter the circumstances. I mean, you see like these grass fires, and there's people, they'll never hear their stories, but they went.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't want to be known. Yeah, they just go.
Yeah.
And like Granddad always say, when the ox is in the ditch, you know who's going to be there. Mm. And that's when you kind of, there ain't many cowboys that aren't running to something. Yeah. You know, you always talk about, you see people that run towards stuff and people mm-hmm. that run from it. Most cow people, they're running towards it.
Wow.
And that industry is just kind of built like that.
What's the, let's fast forward a little bit. You have the Midland Meat Company.
Right.
Give me the vision behind that. Where did that start?
That started with go back to me just trying to find out what I'm supposed to be doing, mm-hmm. honestly. I'm struggling with things, just like, man, like I'm not, you know me, I've gotten to know you over these years, mm-hmm. like it's hard for me not to talk to people. Mm-hmm. And so I'm just like out there, just like I'm loving it, but I'm like anxious to be doing something else, like because I see there's so much opportunity, and so I just I went to my dad in 2009, and met him out there in the yard at the North Curtis. I said, Dad, listen, there's a lot of things I kind of want to do different. I don't want to change what you're doing. So I want to start my own company. He goes, good for you. And, you know, and that was just kind of like one of those things. Because that's hard to step away from Scarborough Cattle Company.
Yeah.
And I started a little company called JCS Cattle Company. And my dad helped me with that first herd because he was, you know, we're driving these cows across the pasture. And he's like, John, these cows look really good. And I said, well, yeah, you put them together, you know. Like, and he says, how many dries you got? I said, Dad, there's not a dry in there.
What does that mean?
That means a cow that didn't have a calf.
Okay.
So I had 75 cows in this little herd. And he's like sitting there and he's like, so you got 100% calf crop, which that's what ranchers, cow-calf guys, your calf crop is everything.
Yeah.
Because your cow's your asset, or your widget, your land's your asset.
Mm-hmm.
But you want the best calving percentage because they produce for you.
Right.
And I said, well, Dad, actually, it's a little over 100 because one of them had twins. And he just kind of looked at me and shook his head, and he said, he made me a deal right then. He said, listen, and I couldn't rub two pennies together. And I mean, literally, my wife, Amy, and she was working 2 jobs as a nurse in Midland and in Odessa, the neonatal over there. Yeah. And she was paying the bills. Mm. And a lot of people don't understand that, but I say it with complete honesty, and I'm completely humbled by, that's the way we were raised. Yeah. I mean, in our family, you kind of had to earn it, and there was nothing given to you. Mm-hmm. And, you know, it was kind of one of those deals. And I said, Dad, he gave me a price, and I'm sitting there going, I don't have that kind of money in my bank. Mm-hmm. And he goes, well, you got to that gate. And he left up, and I didn't have to think real hard. I'll have to figure it out. And so I trotted up to the gate and said, okay, I'll do it. He says, how do you want to brand them? And I said, nobody's using the Scharbauer brothers anymore. We kept it registered. I was like, I'm just going to put a figure 5 on the left hip. And that's how that started. And that was the start of the herd. Now, the Wagyu deal came in 2011.
Okay.
And so I called my dad, and I'm like, Dad, there's a breed I've been looking at. I want to get in. I think they could help us. They throw a little bitty black calf, which is really good for the market. Mm-hmm. And I know I'm probably boring you with the cattle talk, but...
No, I think it's fantastic, actually.
So I'm like, because we're breeding these Jersey bulls, and there's nothing wrong with jerseys. Small calf.
Yeah.
Problem is they're throwing all these off-colored calves, and we're getting hammered at the market with them because black is the trend. Angus did a tremendous job marketing. You see certified Angus beef on everything. And sadly, I can say, and I have nothing against Angus. I run a lot of them. But certified Angus means that animal is only 51% black-hided. Might not have any Angus in it at all. So that's a little knowledge.
There you go.
A lot of labels you got to really be aware of. And that's one of the reasons I got in the meat business. So we get strumming there, and I go buy this bull. And I'll never forget loading him. I call this rancher, Jim Chisholm, down in Wimberley, Texas. I said, I heard you have Wagyu bulls. Yes, sir. You know, he's got to. I'll never forget the way he talks, because he's like, are you a cow man? Because like they've got small country down there, and they raise, 8 or 10 head. And he's like, what do you want to do? And I tell him what I want to do with my bull. And wow. He's like, wow. And I'm like, I'm going to turn him out on like 25 heifers and see what happens. And these are like pets to him. Mm-hmm. So I meet him down in Sonora off of the interstate. And he's like, I'm like, just back your trailer up. I'll back up to it. He's like, he's looking at me like, this guy's crazy. And I hand him the check. I said, here, just in case he gets out on the interstate, I own him, And so I kind of eased it. We backed up, and I jumped the bull into my trailer. I backed up, butt to butt, and walked him in there. And he's just like, wow. And so I turned this bull out, and it's kind of funny. He shows up at the ranch. A good friend of mine, Ron Huffman, shows up, and he does a lot of dirt work out there. And he looks at it, and he goes, I don't know what your granddad would think of that thing. And I was like, I know, it's the ugliest thing I've ever seen. And it was. I mean, I'm looking at this thing that looks like a mix between a Jersey and a Corriente, and my heifer's looking down at this thing because he's a foot shorter than my heifer, and I'm going, oh gosh, what did I do? Like, what am I doing? And Ken comes over. She goes, oh, she'll find a trail. You know, that means he'll get her in a trail. As I was worried that he wasn't going to be able to cover my heifers. And so, 9 months goes by and those calves start hitting the ground. And here they come, 35, 40 pounds, little black things, look like jackrabbits. And at first I'm like, oh my gosh, look at that leggy little thing. But 2 or 3 weeks go by and they start filling out. And I'm like, that's a pretty good looking animal. Dad comes out to the ranch. He's like, what are those? And I said, those are those Wagyus. He says, a what?
A what?
He still doesn't know what a Wagyu is. And I'm like, yeah. And he goes, golly, how many? I said, I got one bull. I showed him. He goes, oh, man. I said, yeah, Dad, look at those calves.
Yeah.
And he says, there's our black calf out of a heifer. They didn't have to pull a one, which that's a big thing. And so that was kind of that was kind of the start of the Wagyu.
When you say you didn't have to pull a one, that means you didn't have to manually engage in the birth.
Yeah, because on a heifer, you really want a low birth weight animal. You want the calving to be as easy as possible.
Yeah.
If the calving's hard, then the heifer's more than likely not going to get bred back.
Yeah.
And if you have to pull them, a lot of times they don't breed back.
And so you go down this road, and it has the Midland Meat Company, your store, already started at this point.
No, very
so you're
very
just
limited.
getting your stock ready, so to speak.
Yeah, and this is kind of the story that it just started there, and Dad's like, hey, you think you can find me some of those bulls? I said, well, how many you want? Because now, we're working together, but I'm not working for him anymore. I was like, I'll find, but I'm helping him because he's my dad, and I love him. I love I love that he's willing to change now. Like, he sees this.
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah. And he said, get me 10 bulls. I was like, Dad, 10 of these will cover 300 head. He's like, no. And I didn't believe it either, because Jim Chisholm tells me they'll cover 50. And I'm like, how is that? We run a bull to 15 cows. And he's like, well, they're libido, and they've got a high sperm count. And I'm going, really? And I didn't believe it until under a microscope, they're like 4 to 1 on an English breed, and they will jump a fence looking for stuff to breed. And I know that's, but it's. I mean, they're made for one thing, and that's that. I mean, they're really good at it. And
we're talking about. No, I'm not even going to say that. I'm wondering about. I'm just thinking through the clips we're going to pull from this podcast, and it's just going to be classic.
Well,
it's just. This is so good.
Well, it's but that's kind of this. And Amy and I, we're sitting there, and I'm like, Amy, I was venturing off. I've kind of got an entrepreneur spirit in me. Like, I see something, I'm like, that can be better.
Yeah.
I don't want to reinvent the wheel, but I think I can fix the wheel. And we had some things on our property that weren't getting utilized, in my opinion. So I went to my uncle. I went to even my granddad at the time. I said, hey, there's a little piece of property over here. And that was what was cool. As soon as I decided to start my own business, my granddad, because we were leasing the North Curtis from my granddad.
Oh, okay.
He was still around. Well, my granddad says, hell, son, if you're going to do it, you just lease that ranch from me. So without telling my dad, he was no longer in business down here. And he was happy with it because he wanted to be up there, and he was doing other things up there. So it all worked out, really. So the South Curtis and the North Curtis, I was running cattle on, and well, really not the South Curtis after that, because once he passed in 2014, we'd sold that ranch. Occidental bought it, so one north of Midland. And but anyways.
And so when do you open the store? The
store opens in 2015.
Okay.
So, wow, and the way this all kind of happened, I know it's crazy that we're coming up on 9 years, October. It feels like it's flied, but really, this is how this all happens. A guy by the name of Tate calls me from Texas Tech, and he's like, hey, rumor is you're breeding some Wagyus. And it was out in the industry. Everybody thought I was nuts. Like all the Angus people, because we'd go to these bull sales and Dad buy 10 or 15, 20, a lot of bulls. And a couple years in a row, we're not showing up. And they're like, they're running those Wagyu. And it was kind of a doctor-lawyer type breed for a while. It was a hobby. They were meat, high-end meat.
High-end meat. Yeah.
And I was looking at them for a totally different reason. Well, Tech calls me and he says, hey, and I said, hey, listen, yeah, I do. I've got a few. He goes, would you feed a couple out? Because we want to see what the carcasses do. I'm like, yeah, I've actually got a couple on feed right now because I'm raising a beef, and I figured let's just raise out of these. I heard the beef's good. So I send him these 2 beefs, and we make a deal, which I thought was a no-brainer. He's like, it's $500 a head. Just let us look at it, study it, and we'll box it and get it back to you. And I was like, great. That's $500 cheaper than I was going to have to pay my other packer, you know? And he calls me back. He's like, you won't believe this. And I was like, what? And he said, those graded higher than anything we've ever seen in this deal. And I'm like, in this deal? He says, yeah, here at Tech. And he goes, what all's in that? And I said, well, it's half Wagyu, quarter Hereford, and quarter Angus. And he's like, it's unbelievable. I've never seen marbling like this in meat. And I hadn't seen it yet.
Oh, yeah. So this is your first time?
This is my first time because we're selling those calves and we're getting a premium for them. But I'm trying to now figure out, why are people willing to pay 15, 20 cents over market for these little things? And so I'm going to keep 1 or 2. And that's what I did. And he says, this is unbelievable. This meat. And I said, I can't wait to taste this. I said, well, take a couple and then send me, I'm getting the rest. And that was it. And Amy and I were eating at Nobu in Las Vegas. We like to go to Las Vegas, and we like Nobu because we like sushi. I like all good kinds of food.
Yeah.
And they had Wagyu on the menu. $40 an ounce.
Whoa.
There's Kobe, but I know now, being in the restaurant business, that there's really only like 8 restaurants in the United States that serve true Kobe beef because it's from Japan.
Right.
And it's a totally different deal.
Yeah.
Well, this wasn't, I don't think, but they're like, it's part of this tasting. And I said, fine, we'll take 4 ounces because that was part of the tasting. And I'm like, I can't believe I just paid $120 for 4 ounces of meat or whatever it was, 160. And I eat it, and I put my little thing down. I said, honey, our meat's better than that. And I was like, if they can get 40 an ounce, I'm sure I can get something for our beef. Let's open a meat market.
Right there in Vegas, you decide to.
Yeah, it's like, because we grew up in Amarillo where we had an Eads meat.
Yeah.
And we didn't go to the grocery store for meat. We went to the meat market.
Went to the meat market, yeah.
And even if it meant driving 15 minutes out of town. So location wasn't a huge deal for me, but when I'm driving down and I just get this feeling, and I go off my gut a lot. An old cowboy said, your gut's your Holy Spirit. You better listen to it. And I just pull in, smoker's choice. That's what it was. And I drive through the drive-through line, and I look through there, and I realize it looked like nobody had been there for a good while, month or two. I run some title work. I have my sister look into it. She's a real estate person, and she gets me a phone number, and I call this lady. I said, hey, you want to sell your building? No, hell no, kind of deal. And she calls me back. She's like, well, maybe, and then it starts. And we negotiate, and I'll never forget that because it was funny how that all went down. But I ended up buying this piece of property. And I still don't know if I'm going to do a meat market. I was thinking coffee shop or meat market. And then it was just like a couple things happened in our life, and it was like, I think I was called to feed people. Then I start feeling what I'm really supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
Because I'm venturing off into some other goofy things, and I just decided, and it's like, and I'm like, we're going to do that. And when we named it, that was something. Midland Meat Market, we were thinking about a name because I was like, and my wife and I's goal was to feed people. And I'm like, honey, listen, at this point, ranching, you don't make a lot of money ranching. Like, I'll figure out other ways to make money. So if this thing just break even and we can feed people, then it's going to work.
Yeah.
And I said, and I think we can create something where people are going to want to come to it. I just feel like it's going to work. And we started construction on that little thing, and I still don't know what I'm doing because I'm not in retail. I have about 100 and something heads sitting in a grow yard in Groover, because that's another whole conversation that God just put in a man I call. I said, hey, I hear you feed Wagyu cattle. And Joe Morris, he still to this day, I lean on him a ton up there in Groover. And because he feeds out my cattle, he finishes them for me. And he's like, I do. And I said, do you have a pen? I've never fed cattle because we're cow-calf people. So now I'm getting into the feeder deal. And all this is just on faith. I'll be honest. People ask, how did you figure? And I said, I don't have any rhyme or reason other than just God was moving it. And it was like things open that probably shouldn't open, that open. And like I was like, well, okay, I guess this is what I'm supposed to be doing. And next thing you know, we got a store up. I ask around, and there's a barbecue guy I ended up buying the half acre from, Junior Urias, and he was out here. He was a popular guy from Midland. And I'd ask all these guys, I said, hey, who's the best meat guy in Midland? Like, when you get your meat, where do you go? And then all of them were HEB, and you need to talk to this guy, Adrian. Adrian runs that department. And so this guy's, his name kept coming up.
Yeah.
And I was like, do you got his number? And I was like, surely, and I'm not about taking, people from businesses, but like, I needed a guy. And I knew it'd be tough, so I called Adrian. I said, hey, Adrian, I told him who I was. I said, I'm thinking about opening a meat market. And he's like, okay. Like, he's just like, whatever.
Yeah.
He's running 40.
Why are you calling me?
Yeah, he's running like 40 or 50 people over there at the meat. And at that time, that HEB, and it might still be, the highest grossing beef sales of any HEB of all of them.
Wow.
Was the one on Wadley. And probably still is, if the other one out on the highway hadn't taken it. Because this is a major meat city. They like their steaks. Call Adrian, and sorry I'm long-winded. I know you're going to edit this, but I meet him over at Orhays off of Big Spring, and now it's not Orhays, and he's looking at me like, what am I doing here? And we're both 10 years younger than this, so he's looking at me, I'm young 30s, and I'm like, I think this is going to work. And I keep saying I think. Like, I said, but I need a guy that knows, how to cut meat. And I just basically said, whatever HEB's doing for you, I'll match it. I was like, but here I think you'll have a little more ownership. If it works, it'll work. And he's like, well, what's your idea? And I said, well, I've got my own cattle. Mm-hmm. I'm going to get them harvested. At that time, my idea was just bring frozen steaks down here and sell them out of a freezer.
Oh, wow.
Like, because that's how Eads did it.
Yeah.
So that's the only model I know in my head.
Yeah.
And we literally, and he's like, okay. And he hadn't seen the meat yet either. He doesn't see it till day one when we open the bags. So he doesn't know what he's working with. He takes a leap. It takes about a month. He calls me back and says, I think I want to do that. And I said, okay. I think I started paying him in August, and we didn't open till October because the building wasn't getting done.
Yeah. The
cattle were ready.
What's he say when he sees the meat?
He didn't really say much. He just kind of looked at it. He's like, we've never seen meat like that. And I was like, really? Like, I'm blown away.
Yeah.
Because I figured this is pretty common.
Yeah.
And when he touches it, he's like, it feels different because the marbling will melt.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so that was kind of that. And now,
he's been with you almost 10 years.
Yeah, and fantastic. Our people there are awesome. We've grown, obviously. That little store, that Smoker's Choice, is now Lucchese's.
Yep.
We moved out of it a year and a half, 2 years ago.
Yeah, now you got the big store behind it.
Now we've gone to 5,000 square feet. And, like, it's funny, go back to those days where I'd leave at 2 or 3 in the morning and go to Stratford. And then my ranch man would leave and go to Stratford, bring our meat back. We were hauling it back. It was 8-hour, 9-hour turn. And from there to where we are now, Benny Keith actually brings our meat to us.
Okay.
Because they pick it up in Stratford.
Yep.
And then I have another plant that we process in Itasca. So going from 2 or 3 head a week or every other week to now where we sit around 30, 35 head a week.
Wow.
And all that is because Midland supports it.
Yeah.
And like, I'm doing what we're supposed to be doing. I utilize 100% of our herd, and it comes to Midland.
Yeah.
And it gets sold under our name.
Yeah.
It gets scattered out over restaurants. But that's kind of how that thing, and honestly, I think...
exceeded your expectations? Or did you expect to be here?
No, I really, like I said, I went in it not knowing anything. And to this day, it's not done. Like, I keep getting, hey, keep going.
Yeah.
Keep going. And like, and so that's where, obviously the half acre came off of that, which is now a going spot. We're about to expand on it again, about to add a whole nother parking lot because, it's crazy what's going on over there.
Takes a lot of parking lot in West Texas for all the trucks.
It does. And just know my lots, I do the 9 foot. All these people that have these 8 foot spots really bother me. Like, we're in Midland, go ahead and do the 9 foot, make it, because everybody's in a 250.
Yeah, at least.
And that crowd. But what I love about that deal, we were awarded top family restaurant in Midland from the MRT.
Yeah.
Yeah, that place gets its own accolades. Number one caterer, you know, number one barbecue, which barbecue is thrown around, and I'm just like, you know, we're kind of more than barbecue, but fine, call us a barbecue joint.
Yeah.
If that gets us in Texas Monthly, call us barbecue. And
Whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, so like right now we got a brisket lasagna, you know, and last week we had a pita with a hanger steak. So what I saw is opportunity to move our cuts.
Yeah.
And it started with a pitmaster, Aaron Leslie, putting a trailer behind my shop.
Mm-hmm.
And he's got Texas Old Dust. So what spins off of the meat company, now we've got seasoning. Yeah. We've got charcoal. And all that's just from the same cow herd.
Yeah.
And
all going back to taking a risk.
Yeah, it's just getting up and going and doing it.
And backing up your trailer and a guy thinking you might be crazy.
Yeah, and you know, though, everything starts somewhere.
Yeah.
And you know, whether it's a table in Eastland talking about sheep, to turning out a Wagyu bull, to opening a restaurant, I think, you know, all this stuff is just, if you keep your eyes and your ears open and you kind of, you know, I hate to say put your blinders on, but just
get focused.
Yeah. Literally focus to a point, because, you know, I always would say I'm so ADD, I can't stay with one thought. Yeah. And that's why this thing might work, because there's so many logistics, so many things happening at once. I mean, this morning, you know, we shipped 33 head on a truck. I had another 6 going somewhere, and I've got a man up at the farm hauling some cuts to the sale barn, you know, because anything we doctor, it gets kicked out. And there's just little things all the time. And that's another thing. We added a farm, so now I'm in the farming business a little bit, which I act like my farmer talks to me, and I'm like, yeah, that sounds great.
Focused distraction.
Well,
is
you
what
know,
you do.
Well, you know, you got to trust your people too, though. Yeah. Like, that's something from day one that the Scharbauers have been extremely blessed with, really good people. Yeah. I think we see the value of working with people. You know, we've got kind of a saying in our family: you don't work for us, you work with us. Yeah. And that's something. And I think it doesn't matter if you're on the ranches, in the restaurant, or in the meat store. Everybody feels a part of it. Mm-hmm. And that's where the brand is what we get behind. Yeah. But we're working for the same, you know, like it. And it goes back to feeding people and bringing people back to a table. Yeah. And that was kind of our initial goal. We wanted the family unit back in the house. Right. We wanted a reason for people to come. We know that whether it's a funeral or wedding, food is it's kind of like music. Yeah. Food's the one thing that can bring joy in the worst moments.
You know, this legendary family history that you just literally boiled down to. We want that legacy to be people around a table enjoying each other, being together.
That's right.
And that's an amazing thing, because no matter where you are, that the meaning of sitting down and sharing a meal, and at the same time you making it one of the best meals they could ever have.
Well, and that's, you know, I don't. Like I said, I think God blesses that stuff. Mm-hmm. And I really feel like, and I know you can say what you want, but I can honestly say that there's no rhyme or reason other than genetics. You know, I tell people, they say, why is your meat different? How come it tastes like that? Like, because it can't be explained till you try it. Mm-hmm. And I'm not going to sit here. I'm not going to put up billboards. I don't like running ads. Yeah. We help things. If you see our logo, it's probably because we did something. Right. And more than likely we said, no, we don't need our logo or what. We don't like that, but we know we feed a lot of people in this town, and it's not out of pat ourselves on, but that's what we're supposed to do. Yeah. But it's neat to know that we feed, you know, whether it's breaking bread or at the soup kitchens or wherever, that there's somebody in New York paying $500 a plate for the same meat. Yeah. And to me, that's humor.
It is kind of humorous, actually.
And I don't have any problems with that. Like, I feel like that's supposed to happen. So it's a high quality product, and when I mean quality, I mean clean. Yeah. Like I'm on this, you know, kind of God's food versus man's food. Mm-hmm. I think food is extremely important. And I think, especially in the youth, I think you're seeing it. Half the kids right now have some sort of allergy to foods. Yeah, that's all because that was created. Right. You know, we didn't have these problems 100 years ago. Right. You know, man's food to me is anything you got to open in a bag.
Mm-hmm.
God's food is it comes, it's clean. And beef, our beef is as clean as we can get it. You know, outside of being completely organic and never vaccinating, but we're within the guidelines of a third-party verification for all natural with no hormones, no steroids, no antibiotics. And on top of that, our husbandry, the way we care our cattle, we get awarded. Our cattle aren't wild. That has a lot to do with it. Very, like I said, the genetics are there. And when people say, why is it different? I can't take the credit because 100 years ago, my great-granddad made a decision on a bull that changed the genetics. So it's really 100 years of genetics.
Yeah.
Or 100 years of decisions.
Yeah.
And getting back and trying to get in the minds of those early settlers and those Scarbers, and they stayed the course. Yeah. And never really, you know, there's a lot of things they could have done. I mean, whether it's start an oil company at that point because of the land.
Yeah.
But
never did.
No, you go back, and my great-granddad knew. He knew that he was not a selfish person. I can just tell you that. If he was the opposite. And he knew whenever my granddad married Dorothy Turner, the Turners were an oil family. They were, Fred was a geologist and landman back in the day, really good at what he did. And that kind of merged the ranchers and the oil people when the Scarbers and the Turners married. It made it okay for now ranchers to lease to oil companies. Because back then, ranchers didn't want anything to do with oil companies.
Yeah.
Even though they were throwing money at them, ranchers didn't like their land getting tore up.
Yeah.
And but that kind of opened the door. And that kind of goes back to that house. That was the house it's the Museum of the Southwest. They call it the Turner Mansion.
Yep.
And that belonged to obviously the Turners, but my grandmother grew up in that house, and she has a sister, and her mother was murdered in that house, Miss Turner, and that's history in Midland. You can look it up.
Yep.
But the house never was the same. They ended up giving it, you know, kind of the city, turned into a museum.
Yeah, Museum of the Southwest.
It's a neat property now that Midland can enjoy, and it's a neat spot.
Yep.
But in a short series, that's the story, and it's still going because I've got 4 kids, and what's cool about this and what I love about it is it's not just a cowboy cowgirl world anymore.
Yeah.
Our ranching operation has opened up doors to where my kids can be in restaurants. They can run a market. You know, I've got opportunity to. I could put one of these pretty much, I think, anywhere. Because the model works, these little convenient grocery stores, whether it's a Midland Meat, but just that model alone would work. And I think people are tired of going into big spaces, parking in the back. You know, our place, you can get in and out, met with service. A lot of times we remember your order. And it's been fun. Midland's been awesome about that and just supporting it.
I want you to tell us the story. I think I've heard the story, but not the real story. And it involves Toby Keith, your family, and a famous song. I'll let you go.
This is fun because when my granddad passed away, so every time I hear this song, it kind of takes me back, reminds me of him. And he was known for his one-liners. He was witty, and he could come with them. And I got invited to a horse race with my grandparents. They were running horses at Lone Star and there in Grand Prairie.
Yeah.
And we look over there, and Toby Keith, he had a really high-powered horse in a stakes race that day, and a mare, I think, gray mare. But anyways, and my grandmother said, "Hey, John, look, there's Toby Keith," and my granddad's like, "Who?" And you just got to understand my granddad. And he's like, I said, "Granddad, it's Toby Keith. He's a country singer." You know, late, obviously, passed this year. But, and Granddad walks up, and they kind of meet. And he's like, Kobe. And Toby looks at him, and he says, "Mr. Scharbauer, Toby Keith." And he looks right at him, and he says, "You think you got that hat the way you like it?" And in the cowboy world, that's kind of saying, you know, I don't know much about that. I don't think much about that hat you're wearing. And Toby said, said, well, Mr. Scarbauer, it's kind of my staple, you know, and it is. You look at his logos, his hat's a big part of it.
And Toby Keith, I've heard, is just this. He's as real.
He's as real and as just. And so I'm sitting here watching this.
You're embarrassed already.
Well, I'm like, my grandmother is, because she was like Clarence, like she was known to just holler at him, and he would come most of the time, but he would talk for hours if he had to, and they get to talking, and I go out. At this point, some races have started, and we're watching the races, and instead of like going in between, there's like 20 minutes, they're out there still talking, and I'd go out there every once in a while just to, you know, I didn't want to be nosy, but I was like, that's kind of cool. It's Toby Keith, you know, and it was a pretty popular time. This was, I don't know, 2003, 4, right in there. And
so this is after 9/11.
9/11. So he had all his American, and Granddad mentioned that. He's like, oh, you're that one that sings about sticking your boot up. You know, he's like, that's how he's talking to him. It's a real conversation between two men, you know, and they're talking horses. And finally, my grandmother says, hey, John, go get your granddad. He's bugging Toby. And so I go out there. I'm like, Granddaddy, Grandmommy wants you inside. All right, you know, I'm coming. And Toby's like, Mr. Scarbauer, I enjoyed talking to you. I really enjoy those stories. I would wish I'd have been around to see you when you were a calf roper, because he was telling him all this stuff. And Granddad looks at him and says, Toby, let me tell you something. I'm not as good as I once was, but I'm as good once as I ever was. You know, time goes on, and we're just don't think anything of it. And I go visit my granddad, and my grandmother had passed away, and he wasn't doing very good. And I would go see him, and he gets up and he throws this USA Today down, and it's Toby Keith breaks #1 record for top on the record, or whatever, top of the charts. And he's sitting there, and he's like, you remember him? And I was like, oh yeah. And he's like, I'm pretty sure I had something to do with that song. And sure enough, you listen to the song, and it's these stories that they were telling. They're stories. And Granddad was like, I don't want a thing, you know? And basically, he just wanted him to get a new hat.
That's the funniest story ever.
and so every time I hear that song come on the radio, I just grin and think, Granddad, you know, if one man could come up with one line like that, and I know that was an old Western line, I think, because Dad told me it was just back in the day, because when you really dissect that sentence, he's just saying, I was only good one time, but I was good that one time. And it's an awesome line. I love that people are talented like that and can find something to make a song like that.
That is the best. I don't know of a podcast that I've recorded where I've listened this long. It's just a great story. I hope when people listen, they get an idea of just, I'll give one example, and then we'll shut it down here. You were gracious enough to get my family to the NFR, the finals rodeo in Las Vegas. I'd never been to that.
Yeah.
And I remember sitting there, first of all, the friendliest crowd I've ever been around in my entire life. The gentleman in front of me that you told me I'd meet. What a fantastic gentleman.
Right.
And then I remember during the bull riding session, the cowboy gets bucked and he gets hurt pretty bad. And all the paramedics are out there. And I remember the announcer saying, all of you know what to do. Now we're in this moment. So let's just take this time to be praying.
Yeah.
And you just felt, I walked away and I felt this irony of just, here I am in Vegas, and I just maybe experienced one of the most spiritual environments I've ever experienced, surrounded by, not everybody, but a large crowd of people connected to the earth, connected to the Lord, and just legacy.
Yeah.
And that's quite a story.
It's and that was fun. And the NFR, that's obviously something been blessed to do the last couple of years, and I'm glad y'all got to enjoy that, because I hadn't been. 3 years ago was my first time to go, because I'm not a rodeo into the big into that stuff, and just because there was always, I don't know, it's a different aspect of the lifestyle, but. There's no better time, in my opinion, to go to Las Vegas. If you're going to go, you need to time it during the rodeo.
Yeah.
Because for 10 days, Las Vegas gets taken over by cowboys and cowgirls. And it changes the whole city.
It does.
People open doors for each other. People are polite. They let you go. It's the way West Texas is.
That's right.
So, like, if you want to experience Las Vegas, where you know, I mean, yeah, you're going to get it. It's still Las Vegas.
Still Las Vegas.
But you saw it right there.
It changes it.
And when I say that industry, the backbone is faith of that industry. You got to have faith.
Yeah.
And you got to find what God's trying to show you in moments of struggle when either it's drought or it's market, because there's really nothing helping the rancher. Farmer either, really. They're kind of getting paid not to farm now. And it kind of bothers, you know, it's kind of upsetting to know the future and the direction that we're going in this industry. And I wish more and more ranchers they don't have to do what I'm doing, but take note and follow your cattle through and make sure they make it. Like, don't just have pride in your herd, but have pride in your beef, because that's what you're raising. And we need to control this deal, because it's scary what's going on the back end. And I didn't know all that till I get in the meat business, and I realize, you know, it's not going to be long, and people they're not going to be able to pick what they want to eat if we keep going like we're going. And the things they're trying to do with vaccinations, and it's pretty scary.
Yeah.
And the like, going back to the labeling thing, it's like U.S. beef right now. That all that means is that it was packaged in the United States. There's new things where you can ship meat into this country, repackage. As long as it's packaged, it's considered
here.
U.S. So what that's doing is it's lowering the quality. It's not as regulated. So the beef, you don't know what's in it, and so people are eating this stuff and they have no idea what they're eating.
Well, let's do this. I'm gonna wrap this up, but let's do a second episode. And let's go into the politics of all this, because I know you've been watching it and you've been paying attention to it. And I want to separate that discussion from just the wonderful legacy.
Yeah, and that's great. And I appreciate you having me. And, you know, obviously the Scharbauers aren't done in Midland.
Yeah.
I think, and I speak like that because I know the foundation, the Scharbauer Foundation. I know what Granddad intended that to be used for. And I can see that into the future being growing Midland. Yeah. And I think if Midland, and that's where we're at, not just in Midland, but in a society, a lot of folks that sit and say, why don't we have this? Why don't we have that? And really, we just kind of got to, as Granddad would say, pull your bootstraps up and go do that.
Go do that.
And then we wouldn't have those problems. And
yep. I remember, last thing I'll close up with, I had some people when I was mayor come to Midland from Albany, New York. It was a big company. And they came to tour here. And when they left, a couple of days later, I get an email from the officer of the company. And he says, thanks for the tremendous visit to Midland, Texas. He said, I've never been anywhere that feels like America, like West Texas and Midland. And that's the Scharbauer story as well. So thanks for letting us know.
Well, no, I enjoyed it. And thanks for letting me tell it.
Thanks, John.